This music video is for the boys, the mens and the kens with music taste that ranges from Have a Nice Life to Radiohead, or in other words, fans of Berserk, Oyasumi Punpun, and Evangelion. And I will be using these as frame of references and comparisons to Revolutionary Girl Utena, since you haven't seen it. And if you're someone who has seen Utena, then get your chips in queso and let's go! Horror is my favorite genre of fiction, and none of these anime manga are falling in that descriptor, but who cares? And horror is my favorite due to how it targets probably the most innate emotion to life, and that of course being fear. Fear encompasses a lot of experiences, much like how happiness does with anything from a good meal to partying. And fear does the same exact thing. It covers a lot of experiences that we deal with within life. You'll experience fear from everything from watching old Disney movies to why you panic rolled in Elden Ring and died for the 100th time. As you can tell, lived experiences. Life is low-key terrifying when you think about it. From being on the road, which can end in a car accident, to trying to enjoy lunch that turns out to be awful, or going to your school's auditorium but you just end up meeting a ghost that's manipulating your friends. Things can get out of hand really fast. And that everyday type of horror is what Utena really taps into. On its surface, Utena is typically the last thing you'd expect to see alongside Guts, unless you're an alt girl on TikTok ready to defend Nana. And that is because this anime is first and foremost a shoujo anime that should really be classified under what weird liminal space that Twin Peaks occupies. And its setting is at Otori Academy, and if you know Japanese, alarm bells will begin ringing now, because everything within this anime is intentionally done to kill your sense of media literacy as you try to catch every layer of foreshadowing, symbolism, parallels, and seconds of a stopwatch, all to uncover what is essentially an anime that explores the horror of life. And you might be wondering, is this just lesbian Evangelion? I'd say you're wrong, because it's even better than Shinji post-HRT. The start of Revolutionary Girl Utena is alike to Evangelion though in both our deconstructions of their genre, that later dives into depressing realities of its extended cast. As Utena steps into her new school, she is moving through her genre in an almost typical way, until, much like Shinji, she's confronted with a mysterious girl that fans struggle to really understand due to how they tie into the thematic cores of their stories, typical girl behavior. So in Utena, this encounter comes in the form of normalized physical abuse, which destroys any assumption that this is just going to be a normal shoujo anime. As the protagonist of the story, she attempts to save the girl at her own risk of life. And the very first episode ends on Auntie becoming her bride within the society set up in the school. Now, I don't know if you caught this, but this anime has a female protagonist. This pretty much sets it apart from 90% of the anime manga you've experienced, which does play into why this anime is so good. When you compare popular titles within this vague term of psychological anime, you really only have two computers that are well-known female leads outside of a has-been singer and Nana. Utena, just like most shoujo protagonists, is a rather normal girl with a sense of justice, and just like how Punpun and Shinji are, that means we're going to experience the horrors of experiencing what women go through to become adults, which is going to be incredibly traumatizing because, well, growing up is to begin with. Compare this to the likes of Berserk's Casca. Because we're going to be talking about Berserk, here's a quick trigger warning list. Physical abuse of every kind, verbal abuse of every kind, manipulation of every kind, SA, animal violence, murder, and I'm just listing Utenas. Also, Revolutionary Girl Utena is on YouTube officially licensed. If it's not in your area, then just do a Luffy. This is not a suggestion, it's a demand. If Utena is a girl's girl, then Berserk is a man's man, which focuses on the peak body type haver guts. The story focuses on naked women, viscera, Lovecraftian demons, and most importantly of all, trauma. And through his eyes we meet the world's sickest love triangle, Griffith and Casca.
You are fascinating. I find you much to my liking.
They are a dynamic cast of characters within a well-respected and engaging Golden Age arc. This arc explores the protagonist's past along with explaining his character, and much like with the cast of Utena, they're interestingly enough are survivors of SA. Guts is the unexpected character that explores this concept the best with going through the process of his assault, the cognitive impact of it, and his recovery journey along with his relationship to both Griffith and Casca, the latter of which reaches an impressive feat greater than Guts' kill count, an actual good sex scene. Sorry, I was being rude to Evangelion there. Though the most notorious example of SA scenes is with Casca. In her case, it wasn't off-screen or in the past, it happens during the climax of the Golden Age, which ends with her being unable to function mentally. This leads into the protagonist of the story to take revenge against perpetrator Griffith, going forward into the story. This turns Casca into a character without agency going forward. Berserk is not attempting to be a story that focuses on the nuance of Casca's experience and victimization. If you love Berserk, you probably have heard people criticize it, which is more than fair. As mentioned before, Berserk is a man's manga. The story was always going to have to wrap around to the first page of the manga after all. It's also no surprise that the Golden Arc is Berserk's most famous section, considering it focuses on the character dynamics of the three characters, being famously influenced by shoujo, the very genre that revolutionary girl Utena is a part of. You want an anime that effectively uses everything within its medium to explore character dynamics of a sick and twisted love triangle. Well, here you go. Utena, without major spoilers, is an anime that has a most in-depth and most importantly of all respectful depiction of abuse in all of its forms that I've seen, wrapped in a complex spiral of interpersonal relationships, which is why I think any Berserk fan owes it to themselves to watch Revolutionary Girl Utena. Comparing it to Berserk is worlds apart in terms of how the two series handle their content. Reading Berserk is so breathtakingly gorgeous in its awful visuals. Utena, in comparison, is all about abstraction. Many forms of abuse are abstracted, implied, and uses imagery which informs the audiences of traumatic experiences. One of my favorite episodes that really exemplifies this is episode 10. You know exactly what's within the box that's going down the river, but you don't see anything awful. Still a completely dreadful experience. It's dark, depressing, but respectful, and a major key element to the themes coursing in its story all at the same time. In comparison, Oyasumi Punpun pulls no punches, just like Berserk. It's notorious with its graphic content both visually and story-wise, though I often find myself hung up on being invested within it, probably due to its treatment of women and the men who are attracted to them. I'm sorry to say this, everyone, but it's my least favorite out of the three. Watch out. Oh, you're gonna sue me. Oh, you'll sue me. Let's just cut right to the chase. Women, more specifically mothers, to put it bluntly, are shown to be the driving force of abuse within this manga, while the main character and his uncle Yuichi are experiencing a hard life due to multiple other female characters. Punpun's mother, Miyagi, Midori, and Aiko's mother are all why the manga gets as dark as it does. And how many of them are well thought out or explored? Oh, only one. Smells like an Utena diff. Their action or abuse, in other words, characterize Punpun and Yuichi. Both show harmful views of women and sexualizes them, but it's okay because they get to be justified because of how they're trying their best. It's a bit baffling at times, especially with how Yuichi's backstory ends on the note of an abused 16-year-old being a dark manipulator of men. Don't we love a manga that feels more dated than Katya Zamojijakova's 1950s novel Lolita? I know it hasn't been 100 years yet, but come on. Male violence in Punpun is frequently justified, or at the very least, well explored. Punpun's character builds up to his mistreatment of his childhood crush, while someone like Midori is only known as a woman who harmed him gravely. And speaking of characters just being evil, Aiko's mother is also pretty important in this conversation. Aiko suffers from domestic abuse, both emotional and physical, from her mom after her father's passing. And as the story continues, she does murder her mother with Punpun at her side. The manga goes on to portray the cruelest of characters without depth to older women, especially compared to the sympathetic male ones. Punpun and his uncle can exist as more complex male characters, which means they get the most screen time. They are the narrators of the events, their views are the audience's. They get the benefit of the doubt, and that's intentional. Statistically, men are more likely to assault and harm their partners. What's transgressive or raw about Oyasumi Punpun not really navigating that reality? I know it might hurt some fans of the manga to hear. If it helps, I think the main reason why this manga is so beloved is because of how it handles topics of suicidal ideation, which isn't something that we really get to see a lot within manga. And at the same time, the story is designed to make the MC sympathetic, and it does work. And this context is what makes him work as a character both positively and negatively in my experience. Sincerely, if you do love Oyasumi Punpun, I do recommend Utena. I simply find looking realistically into these issues and seeking out unexplored points of views as more challenging, which is what Revolutionary Girl Utena offers, though we do have one exception that you probably have a mental note of. Punpun's mother is the only character that escapes the trend that we've been noticing with this cast. Of female characters, that is. We see her behavior harm herself and her family. We get a picture into her cognition, and we get a sense of the humanity within her, seeing a dichotomy of abuse and love. Something that I feel like I could do with every single Utena cast. And isn't that what it's all about? This video is somewhat inspired by the term psychological anime. To me, that means I can have a character sit down, talk to me about their issues, and then I can diagnose them with bipolar type 1 or 2. Though the whole entire issue with gender running through this manga is still apparent with her, it's revealed that the divorce that happens in the story is more complex than what one might think. She wanted to murder Punpun as a child, and this information is treated as a twist to her expectations of a father committing domestic violence. Ooh, this time he's justified. As you can see, male violence is constantly contextualized around the abuse and violence of women in the manga. For example, in chapter 50, Punpun is assaulted by Midori, and that later contextualizes his attempt on another female character. And for all the Punpun fans out there, you might be saying, oh wait, hold on a minute. He cheats on her, so that's why she does it, so it's actually his fault. But no, those two things are not equivalent. She isn't a main character, she doesn't have really any depth to her, she's pretty much just a tool used for the plot, just like with Aiko's mom too. All of the misogyny is justified by the female characters in this manga. That's so wild. Having the female cast largely perpetrating domestic violence and having the female cast be mistreated so thoroughly leaves me disappointed. And like I mentioned before, Utena levels the playing field of victims and victimizers. Victim and victimization, just like Oyasumi Punpun, is a key aspect of its writing. In truth, almost every character harms another in some fashion. Toga, the main antagonist of the first arc, is shown to be a victim himself, though he spends a majority of his time manipulating Utena and his sister, and the only friend that he grew up with as well. Or we could look at how Nanami is shown to harm those around her due to what she clings onto for guidance in her life. There's a running theme in Utena about how she is cruelly innocent. Just like within Oyasumi Punpun, there isn't any one hero or one antagonist, everybody is a flawed human being. It's just that others are more intentional and powerful with what they can do to others. While Oyasumi Punpun frustrates me in its depiction of abuse, Utena expresses a more realistic concept of everyone around us being able to harm us. The role of a victimizer is something that's more fluid, something that connects to the bio-psychosocial spiritual realities of who we are as people. And in my opinion, that's everything that a psychological anime should be. Honestly though, in terms of complex mothers, Umineko no diffs Punpun with ease. Across the board, men do have a larger role in abuse. A notorious example of this is in Gendo.
Right, ladies?
He's not beating any allegations. His emotional neglect is very apparent and well explored through multiple characters, including his own son, Shinji. And this also includes Rei Ayanami, which is pretty explicit throughout his scenes, and especially within the end of Evangelion. But Evangelion can still be subtle. Take, for example, my favorite character, Ritsuko. She met Gendo as a teenager, as we silently and visually receive that information. And here we also know that she learns of her mother's intimate relationship with Gendo. In her teenage/young adult years, she deals with neglect and eventually loses her mother within Nerve, leaving Gendo essentially free to groom her and to use her. Many viewers don't seem to talk on it, but it's an example of how Evangelion maturely handles abuse. And of course, her story being this subdued is in part due to her being distant to the main character Shinji. We see all of this come down to a head within episode 23, and of course, the end of Evangelion. This subdued trauma is coursing through Evangelion. Evangelion, much like Utena, explores how we harm others while grasping at the truth of how we desperately seek human connection. Ritsuko was left damaged by Gendo and her mother after she was only seeking love. As we can tell, the Hedgehog Dilemma is a major part of the story, including its world building with AT fields.
そう君たちリリンはそう呼んでるね何人にも侵されざる聖なる領域心の光リリンも分かってるんだろ AT フィールドは誰もが持っている心の壁だということを
Evangelion was my favorite anime for years since 2014 until I finally watched Revolutionary Girl Utena. The two I find are pretty similar thematically, and one can view Utena as a natural evolution of Evangelion. Ikuhara, one of the creators of Utena, being an influence on Anno for Kaoru, or how Evangelion paved the way for like anime to even be made in air, even sharing an animator through Hasegawa. Outside of the development side of things, anime writing-wise continues to explore beyond where Evangelion left off. Shinji is a child much like Punpun who's trying to lead a fulfilling life and is within intersections of life. We see him processing his trauma, and we see him grow, and then we see him harm those around him. But where does Utena fit into this? Utena Tenjo is seeking to be a prince, a traditionally masculine role, and she jumps into the fray for a plot readily. Though being assigned female at birth means struggling against gender roles in a much more direct manner than the other two. Utena, through being a female protagonist, opens up additional layers within its themes that the others can't offer. Shinji is interacting with his female cast with attraction in the foreground. Utena, on the other hand, is chased by others who seek to control her. Already you can see multiple barriers that separates her from her own humanity to those around her. That's where the darkness is at. That's where the relatability is at. That's where the complexity is at. That's where the psychology is at. And what makes it more than worth just one watch. Outside of the main protagonist, Utena, much like Evangelion, does well in exploring its extended cast and branching out its themes through them. Mickey is a young male character that seeks to build himself up, but within that process fails to understand the women in his life, thus himself. Saionji is shown to be an abusive man to Anthe, and later on we see how his insecurities and naivete interconnects to his friend Toga. The last arc also introduces a character that's so Kaoru-esque in exploring the masculine value of self-sacrifice, though he's certainly not an angel like him. And this is done within a female perspective. It's rather easy to understand why it quickly became my favorite anime. Another commonality with Evangelion to Utena is how it's able to expand its characters through how the casts are foils to each other. Imagine Asuka and Rei squared. Utena is expansive with displaying its themes through the cast. It takes the very ending for Shinji to break his cycle of pain and to live genuinely. And what is a cycle if not a revolution? Revolution within Revolutionary Girl Utena is directly comparable to Evangelion's last message. Utena jumps off of Evangelion's ending and interrogates the question of how do you live? And how does one choose life? And if you're wondering if one can replace Utena with Nana in this video, you can't, because Nana doesn't have liminal spaces or a character as complex as Anthe. Moving on, Revolutionary Girl Utena does more than what one can ask for in a psychological anime. It's still being picked apart online to this day for a reason. And on a final note, horror frequently has a final girl due to them being so disempowered within their stories, to enhance the threat of possible violence and horror. When you really get down to it, Berserk, Goodnight Punpun, and Evangelion all share a commonality with their most infamous scenes as well. They are centered on the victimization of women from the male perspective, from the end of the Golden Art to Aiko's fate to Asuka in the hospital. Isn't it worth it, at least once, to step into their shoes for stories like these? Thank you for watching, and if you have any thoughts or takes, please share down below. And if you are someone who's watching Utena for their first time because of this video, thank you so much, and let me know how it goes. Bye.